Clay County, 1931. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a mother's love became a nightmare. 3 children vanished, not just into the woods, not just into the snow, but into the shadows themselves. What could drive a parent to feed her own children to something that lurked beneath the floorboards? And what remains of them today is still listening. Before we dive into this chilling tale, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, because you won't want to miss the terrifying journey we're about to uncover. This is the story of Eliza Crowder, the Appalachian mother who fed her children to shadows. They say there are places in the Appalachian Mountains where sound doesn't echo, where a cry can die in the air before it's ever heard. In the winter of 1931, a mother named Eliza May Crowder lived in one of those places. No electricity, no phone, no neighbors close enough to see the smoke from her chimney. She was last seen walking through the frost-covered woods with her 3 children. And when spring came, only the wind was left to answer for what happened there. The Crowder case was buried like a secret no one wanted to remember. A story that passed through whispers, hymns, and the kind of silence that makes people afraid to knock on old doors. Records from that year are thin, torn, some pages missing entirely. What remains doesn't explain how a mother and her children disappeared, only that something changed in that hollow after they were gone. Locals say the holler never thawed again, that no birds landed there after 1931. Some even swear they've heard her voice under the fog, counting softly. 1, 2, 3. Others claim the ground itself breathes on cold nights. At first glance, it's another piece of Appalachian folklore. Another ghost tale told to scare children into staying close to home. But when we began digging through county records, photographs, and asylum reports, a pattern emerged. Not a haunting, not a myth, something else. You see, in Eliza's own handwriting, found in the attic of a long-condemned church, she described something she called the hunger that moves in the dark. A presence she claimed watched her children while they slept. A voice that spoke to her when the fire went out. She wrote that it promised warmth, promised mercy, promised that her children would never feel cold again. Weeks later, she was found alone in a burned-out cabin. Her hands blackened as though she'd been feeding a fire that wasn't there. The sheriff who investigated quit his post the following year. His journal, never released publicly, contained only one entry under the Crowder file. They weren't taken, they were fed. For decades, the incident was lost to time, buried beneath cold records, folded into the folklore of a town that doesn't appear on modern maps. But fragments of the story, newspaper clippings, witness statements, psychiatric notes, began resurfacing in the 1970s. And together, they tell something far more disturbing than superstition. What happened in that cabin wasn't a legend. It was documented. The walls were found scorched from the inside. The doorframe bent outward. There were no remains, only impressions in the ash. Small, childlike, arranged in a perfect circle. Even now, almost a century later, the land is fenced off. Locals avoid it. Hunters claim their dogs won't go near it. And on clear nights, some swear the forest lights faintly blue, as though something beneath the soil still burns. We've spent 2 years piecing together this case. Every report, every photograph, every recording. What you're about to hear isn't an exaggeration. It isn't rumor. It's a reconstruction of the Crowder family's final months. And if the accounts are true, it may explain why some parts of the Appalachian range are still considered unfit for habitation. I'll ask you this before we begin. When hunger calls from the dark, would you answer? The Crowder family lived in a stretch of mountain land known then as Miller's Hollow, though locals stopped using the name after 1932. On old maps, the area is marked only by a line of trees and a single structure drawn in charcoal. Crowder Cabin. There are no census entries, no township logs. The hollow existed like a wound the county didn't want to admit. The people who once lived nearby said it was a place that never felt morning. Fog that clung to the treetops even when the sun was high. Livestock refused to graze near it. Miners from the ridge walked extra miles just to avoid crossing its edge. By 1931, the Depression had turned most of the mountain towns inward. Survival was measured by what you could trap, grow, or steal. Eliza May Crowder was 34, a widow, 3 children under 10, no income but the scraps of her husband's pension. She wrote in her letters that the world felt shrinking, that the woods seemed to move closer each winter, and that she'd begun to hear something breathing in rhythm with her own house. We know little about Eliza's early years. A single photograph shows her standing outside a church in Harlan County, wearing a coat that's too large and holding a Bible with both hands. Locals remembered her voice. Quiet, deliberate, polite. They also remembered that she refused to attend services after her husband's accident. His name was Thomas Crowder. He died in a mine collapse that buried 7 men alive. The official record lists asphyxiation due to entrapment. According to the coroner's assistant, the bodies were not recovered whole. Some of the miners' lamps were still burning when the rescue team arrived. But one of them, Thomas's, had gone out. After the burial, Eliza stopped speaking for almost 2 weeks. Her neighbors reported hearing her humming children's lullabies outside the burned remains of the coal office. That was the last time anyone saw her smile. The Crowder cabin was built at the base of a hollow ridge, where light reached only in fragments. Inside, it was simple. 1 table, 3 cots, and a stove patched with tin. But what stood out, in every photo and sheriff's note, was the wall. The east wall was covered in handprints, dozens of them, small and uneven, pressed into the wood like shadows frozen in motion. Investigators assumed they were made by the children, playing in the ash and dirt. Yet when samples were tested decades later, the residue was not soot. It was carbonized tissue. In early November of 1931, a mail carrier traveling through Harlan County filed a note with the postmaster. Crowder, home unresponsive. Smoke from chimney every night, the woodpile untouched. Children's laughter heard near creek. No sign of family. A deputy was sent 2 days later. He returned before dusk, pale, refusing to go back. His report contained only 1 line. Windows blacked out from inside. When asked what he meant, the deputy said the glass wasn't covered. It was filled. The sheriff dismissed it as superstition. But the same week, 2 other locals made similar claims. Smoke without fire, voices without bodies. Within 10 days, Miller's Hollow emptied. Houses boarded up, tools left rusting in the soil, church abandoned mid-sermon. They left as if something had told them to. In 1954, long after the incident was forgotten, a reel-to-reel tape was discovered in the basement of the old courthouse. It was labeled Crowder 1931, child testimony. The speaker is believed to be Mary Crowder, age 9, the eldest daughter. Mama said don't open the door no matter who knocks, even if it sounds like us. No other audio survives. The interviewer's name was never found, but that single sentence, even if it sounds like us, reappears in several later accounts, written decades apart, by people who had never met. Some say the voice on that tape wasn't human. Others insist it was, and that's what makes it worse. By December 1931, the cabin was silent. When law enforcement finally entered the property in January, the snow outside was untouched. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Inside, the stove was cold, plates still on the table, and the wall of handprints had doubled. The sheriff noted, appears to have been made from inside out, hands pressed into wood with considerable force. But there were no blood traces, no fragments of flesh, no indication of violence. Just those impressions, black against pine. The final entry in the sheriff's notebook reads, Crowder House evacuated. Recommend demolition. Sounds continue at dusk. The demolition never happened. Funding ran out. And the house, against all logic, still stands. When you look at the remaining photographs, the ones stored in the county archive, you'll see a woman's figure in the background of nearly every image. Her face is turned away. Her hand is raised, reaching towards something outside the frame. Experts claim it's a trick of exposure or light interference from old film stock. But in the last photo, taken moments before the case was closed, the figure is clearer. She's standing just beyond the doorway, half hidden by shadow. And behind her, if you brighten the image, you can see three smaller shapes, faint, blurred, as though caught mid-step. The file number on that photograph ends with a handwritten note. Do not return negatives, keep sealed. No one knows who wrote it. Sound fades to slow, distant breathing, then silence. Narrator, softly. What began as a story of loss would soon become something no one could explain, not even the ones who saw it. And as winter deepened, the Crowder family's tragedy became a whisper, carried by the wind. A whisper that still answers, if you call it by name. There are only 4 verified records of Eliza May Crowder's existence. A birth certificate issued in 1897, a marriage license from 1915, a pension claim filed in 1930, and a single hospital admittance sheet, stamped, returned to family. The spaces meant for occupation, education, and next of kin are all blank. Her signature changes each year, first neat, then erratic, then little more than a mark pressed deep into the paper, as if carved instead of written. In every document, one word repeats in her handwriting, hunger, sometimes written beside her name, sometimes underlined, as though it was a reminder. To the county clerk, she was another widow lost to the mines. To the few who remembered her, she was the woman who spoke to empty chairs at night. In the months after her husband's death, neighbors noticed small changes in Eliza. She began sealing her windows with cloth, saying, "The light hurts their eyes." She stopped sending her children to the small schoolhouse 2 miles east, claiming they learned from something else now. When the pastor came to offer prayer, she refused to open the door, but her voice was heard through the wall, reciting scripture backwards, quietly, as though testing how it sounded in reverse. The pastor left a loaf of bread on the porch. By morning, it was gone. He never saw her again. From that day forward, the Crowder home became a point on a map that no one approached. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Not for what might come out, but for what might answer if they called her name. 6 surviving letters, dated between July and November 1931, give us a window into Eliza's final months. Each is addressed to a sister in Tennessee, though no proof of that sister has ever been found. The handwriting begins steady, measured. We are keeping warm. The children still play. The nights are long but kind. But later the tone shifts. The fire won't stay lit unless they are near. They wait at the edge of the woods until I call them. The dark feels full now. In the final letter, written 3 days before her disappearance, she wrote only one line. I am feeding them tonight. No one knows if she meant her children or something else entirely. Oral testimony from a man named Harold Klein, recorded in 1959, offers the last known sighting of Eliza alive. Klein, archival audio, 1959. I seen her that morning down by the stream. She was standing knee-deep in the water, holding something in her hands. Looked like bread or cloth, maybe both. The water was freezing. Steam was coming off her arms like she was too warm inside. I called her name, but she didn't turn. Then I saw 3 shadows move behind her, but the sun wasn't out. Audio ends. Klein moved away 2 months later. His daughter claims he never again walked near running water. On November 29, 1931, Eliza May was brought to Pinehurst Asylum by 2 deputies. They found her wandering barefoot on the mining road, holding a jar filled with ashes. Her intake form lists no physical injuries, but notes that she refused food and water. The attending nurse described her condition in plain terms. Patient claims to hear voices from unlit corners, speaks as if negotiating. No signs of intoxication. Skin temperature elevated, eyes dilated. For 4 days, she spoke to no one. On the 5th day, she whispered a single sentence. They said the children are warm now. A week later, before transfer to another facility, she escaped through an open service corridor. Barefoot, wearing only her hospital gown. Tracks were found leading back toward Miller's Hollow. After that, nothing. In 1974, renovation workers clearing the remains of the old Pinehurst building discover a small cloth-bound book wedged inside a vent shaft. Inside were 3 pages of legible writing, believed to belong to Eliza. The first read, "They stand where the firelight ends. They want to be remembered." The second, "The small one doesn't speak anymore. He listens for the knocking." The third, "When the dark opens its mouth, the floor breathes." Forensic analysis found traces of wood ash embedded in the fibers of the paper. The handwriting matches that on the letters. The journal was sealed by the county under a preservation order, citing possible contamination. No explanation was given for what contamination meant. Witnesses from the nearby ridge saw smoke rising again from the Crowder cabin, though the sheriff's department swore the house had already been cleared. A deputy volunteered to check the site. His patrol log ends at 4:12 p.m. with the note, "Approaching property, light visible inside." He was never seen again. When searchers arrived days later, they found the cabin intact, but cold. The floorboards had shifted, warped as if something beneath had pushed upward. The ashes in the stove were still warm to the touch, and on the wall, a new set of handprints, smaller than the rest, appeared in a perfect ring around the window. A coroner's report listed no cause, no evidence. Just one marginal note beside the deputy's name. He was fed. By early February of 1931, the winter in Clay County had hardened into something cruel. The coal shafts were frozen. The creeks carried sheets of glass instead of water. And the Crowder homestead, a 2-room cabin built into the hillside, was all but swallowed by snow. Neighbors rarely saw them. The nearest family, the Finches, lived nearly 5 miles down the ridge. They recalled smoke rising from the chimney only twice that month. On-screen text: Crowder cabin site, March 1931. What happened inside that cabin during those months has never been fully explained. Eliza's husband had died in a mining collapse 2 years earlier. The company's payout, $20, lasted a season. After that, she worked odd jobs, mending clothes, collecting roots from the woods, sometimes selling what she could at the junction store. But something changed that winter. Witnesses said her children stopped showing up at the church schoolhouse. A delivery man remembered hearing a child crying through the door, followed by complete silence when he knocked. When asked later what he heard, he said, "It didn't sound like one child crying. It sounded like 3, and then none." The mother kept saying they were sick, said they caught the mountain chill, told me to leave the bread by the fence. Testimony: William Bud Pierce, 1931. In her recovered writings, the ones found years later in the church attic, Eliza mentioned something new that winter. She called it the knocking. February 10th, 1931. It comes after the children sleep, soft, like someone trying not to wake them. I looked outside, but the yard was empty. No tracks in the snow. By the end of February, her notes had changed tone. The handwriting trembled. Lines repeated. Words crossed out. It wants them. It waits till I'm too tired to fight the dark. I hear them whispering under the floorboards. Not my baby's voices, but something trying to sound like them. The next entry came 3 nights later. The knocking's louder now. I think it comes from under the cabin. I tried blocking the cracks with rags, but it seeps through. I hear it breathing when the fire dies. That was the last complete page in her journal. The rest were half torn, water-stained, as if someone had tried to burn them and change their mind. Cut 2. A dimly lit photo of the Crowder cabin ruins. The camera lingers on the foundation. Dark, uneven stones where the floor once sat. In 1978, investigators dug beneath those stones. They found small animal. Bones arranged in careful lines, each blackened as though exposed to intense heat. No sign of human remains. Just one object preserved in the ash. A spoon, twisted at the handle, engraved with the letter E. The report was never made public. The files were quietly transferred to the county's Unresolved Anomalies folder, a section reserved for events that could not be verified through normal means. Decades later, forensic specialists studying the artifacts noticed something impossible. The undersides of the bones showed scorch marks consistent with heat rising from below, not from a fire above. Something underneath the floor had burned. From this point forward, there were no more entries in Eliza's journal, only brief notes in local ledgers and recollections from those who lived nearby. The Finch family claimed they saw faint lights in the hollow after dark, flickers moving between the trees, like lanterns with no hands to hold them. One of their children, now elderly, gave a recorded interview in 1975. It wasn't light like fire. It was duller, slower, like something glowing inside fog. And then sometimes we'd hear her voice, calling names we didn't know, not her children's names. The family moved away the next spring. The cabin was later found burned to its frame. No official cause determined. No bodies recovered. Pause. Narrator lowers tone, but the soil beneath the ruins still measures unusually high in temperature, even in midwinter. Scientists have no explanation. Locals have one. They say the shadow she fed didn't leave hungry. When investigators returned to the Crowder property in the spring of 1931, they expected to find nothing. A burned cabin, some debris, maybe signs of a forest fire. What they found didn't match any normal fire pattern. The cabin's wooden beams had collapsed inward, but the corners of the foundation were scorched evenly, as if something had burned in perfect squares beneath the floor. Archival photo. Black and white image of a collapsed foundation, with smoke stains on the stone edges. Caption, Crowder cabin site, County Archive. 27B, 1931. Among the rubble were fragments of furniture melted in place, their outlines still visible in the soot. The rocking chair where Eliza was last seen sat upright, half of it burned, half untouched. On its armrest, investigators found a single fingerprint, preserved in ash. But the print didn't match Eliza. It didn't match anyone. The local sheriff, Thomas Greer, wrote in his field notebook, "The chair was warm when we touched it. There had been no fire for days." He never returned to the site again. Years later, his granddaughter donated his notebook to the Clay County Historical Society. Inside were 6 pages removed by hand. One page remained half torn, containing only 2 words: voices beneath. Ground under cabin soft, smell of burnt oil. No signs of accelerant. Recommend no further excavation. The excavation was closed by the end of March, but something about the case refused to stay buried. Over the next 4 decades, hikers reported finding odd remains near the property. Small impressions in the soil, always circular, never disturbed by rain. One forestry worker described them as shadows that didn't move when you walked past. Cut 2. Archival photograph of rural church interior, ceiling half collapsed. In 1974, a historian named Margaret Delaney uncovered a box of forgotten county evidence in the basement of that same church, the very one where Eliza's writings were found years later. Inside were several items logged as Crowder artifacts: a cracked oil lamp, glass blackened from within, a rusted lockbox with no key, a roll of undeveloped film. Delaney had the film restored at a lab in Lexington. Only 3 frames survived. Frame 1, the Crowder cabin, intact, faint light visible through the window. Frame 2, same cabin, but darker. A faint shape, human-sized, stands by the tree line. Frame 3, the window is now empty. The figure is gone, but the snow near the porch appears disturbed inward, as if something entered rather than left. Delaney wrote, "I thought it was a trick of the camera until I saw the exposure data. The figure blocks light, but there's no shadow cast on the snow. Impossible lighting." The negatives were never returned to her. A fire destroyed the Lexington Development Office 2 months later. Photograph: scorched remains of a film reel, tagged evidence number 74C. Delaney herself vanished during a later research trip in 1978. Her car was found 12 miles from the Crowder site, key still in the ignition. She had recorded over 15 hours of field notes. Only the first tape survived. What Delaney uncovered matched the pattern in Eliza's journals. References to voices from beneath, to warmth coming from the ground, to hunger that moved without sound. Whatever lived beneath that cabin had been there long before 1931. And according to her last notes, it wasn't done. The first tape recovered from Margaret Delaney's belongings runs 36 minutes. The sound is faint, but her voice is steady, describing the Crowder site as if she were documenting an archaeological dig, not a haunting. She begins at dawn. You can hear frost cracking under her boots, the wind through empty trees. Then she says something that still unsettles those who've studied the recording. It feels like walking over lungs. The ground moves when I stand still. Archival audio. Static fades in, faint breathing, footsteps, then Delaney's calm voice. Coordinates match the Crowder Foundation. Subsoil is loose, hollow beneath top layer. I'm hearing a rhythmic sound, possibly groundwater. Smells metallic, iron or... No, not iron. Sweet, like heat off wet stone. She pauses. Then faintly, a knock. Once, then twice. 3 knocks, even intervals, coming from below. The tape continues for 10 more minutes, mostly static, wind, faint whispers. But halfway through, a second voice enters. Not distinct, just low. Something murmuring beneath her words, mimicking her cadence. Cut 2. Archival image of the tape recorder. A heavy steel-bodied model, dusted with ash. Recovered in 1979. Laboratory analysis confirmed no splice, no added track. Yet under certain frequencies, the second voice forms coherent words. Hungry. Warm. Feed them. The forensic audio report listed the sounds as artifacts of interference. But a secondary note, written by the technician, reads simply, if it's interference, it's imitating her speech pattern perfectly. The second tape was found later that same year. It was partially melted, the reel fused together. Only fragments could be restored. What survived lasts just 40 seconds. Restored fragment. Audio recreation. Delaney's voice, fast, whispering. There's another entrance. The soil's warm here. It's breathing. Long pause. It's not waiting for them. It's waiting for her. The tape cuts off mid-sentence. Photograph. A dirt path through overgrown trees. The ground slightly collapsed, as if hollow beneath. 2 months after her disappearance, state police surveyed the area described in her notes. They found a pit, 6 feet wide, descending at an angle into the hill. The walls were smooth, the soil still warm. Samples were taken to the University of Kentucky for testing. The report concluded, residual thermal energy present at depth inconsistent with any natural decay or chemical reaction. In simpler terms, the ground was heating itself. The following week, the pit collapsed overnight. The Delaney tapes, combined with the fragments of Eliza Crowder's journals, began to form a pattern researchers would later call the echo phenomenon. The theory suggested that the land beneath certain Appalachian regions could record sound, not magnetically, but geologically. That vibrations, especially those repeated over generations, might leave impressions within rock and soil. If true, then the whispers, the knocks, and the imitated voices weren't hauntings. They were playbacks, the land repeating what had been said beneath it. But others disagreed. Some claimed the land wasn't echoing, it was answering. By 1980, the state sealed the Crowder property completely. No public access, no excavation permits. The official reason listed: subsurface instability and risk of methane ignition. Yet no methane deposits were ever recorded there. Archival document, State Geological Report, 1980. Section redacted, page 47. In the lower margin of that report, a handwritten note in red pencil reads, voices beneath, still active. What happened to Margaret Delaney after Albe? Her last tape remains unsolved. Her vehicle, recorder, and personal notes were cataloged, but her body was never found. The last known photograph of her shows her standing near the edge of the Crowder site, one hand on the ground, as if listening. Cut 2. The photo, faded, half-burned. Her eyes appear closed. Those who've seen the original claim that if you brighten the image enough, a faint outline appears beside her, not touching, just standing. In 1991, 60 years after the Crowder disappearance, the sealed property was quietly reopened under the supervision of a private research initiative. Their objective was simple: study unexplained geothermal activity beneath the Appalachian Basin. But one of the team members, an audio engineer named Dr. Samuel Kincaid, noticed something strange on their seismic recordings. The equipment was designed to capture vibrations from deep beneath the ground. But these were patterned, repeating in sequences of 3, then silence. The same pattern described in 1931. 3 knocks, then quiet. Kincaid didn't know about the Crowder case, not until a local archivist sent him newspaper scans from the 1930s. He listened again, filtering, isolating, slowing the sound to 1/5 speed. What he heard wasn't mechanical. It wasn't seismic. It was rhythmic breathing. Not air moving through rock, he wrote, but air being drawn through something soft. The university requested a formal review. The data, however, was classified within months. The lead scientist on the project withdrew from public work soon after. His resignation letter contained a single line: "We woke it." Cut 2. Newspaper headline: "Unexplained heat pocket found in Clay County mine shaft." Narrator: unofficially, the research continued. A technician who had access to the raw audio began documenting what he called vocal anomalies within the seismic range. Faint voices that appeared in the data when no human speech was recorded. The technician reported sleeplessness, nosebleeds, and, later, what he described as voices calling from static. He took his own life in 1994. His suicide note contained a sketch of 3 concentric circles, the same formation later found beneath the Crowder cabin. By the mid-1990s, rumors of the Crowder echo had reached paranormal researchers. But what they discovered next would pull the story out of folklore and into federal archives. In 1996, a student field group recorded ambient sounds within 20 miles of the site. When they played the recording back, a woman's voice could be heard, faint, almost swallowed by the wind. Don't let them out. Spectral analysis showed the voice had no directional source. It was embedded in the background frequency, as if coming from the air itself. The file was later confiscated under a public safety notice citing psychological contamination. Only one student from that expedition agreed to speak on record. Her interview, recorded in 1998, lasts 6 minutes. Interview transcript. Voice fades in. It didn't sound like someone speaking to us. It sounded like something trying to remember what speech was. Every time we said her name, Eliza, the echo came back faster. The student was later institutionalized for what doctors diagnosed as auditory intrusion phenomena. But the recordings didn't stop. In 1999, deep scan radar confirmed cavities under the Crowder property, 3 of them, perfectly aligned in a downward spiral, each emitting low-frequency hums. The data showed something else. The heat signatures pulsed, slowly, like a heartbeat. The scans ended abruptly when a technician collapsed near the main trench. He was later revived, but his body temperature had dropped to 88 degrees, despite ambient heat above normal levels. When asked what he felt, he said, "Something was pulling air out of me, like the ground was breathing through me." The project was terminated within 48 hours. Narrator. Officially, the report concluded that unstable geothermal currents were to blame. Unofficially, the tapes, scans, and field notes were sealed in a classified archive. But one image escaped. Photograph. A ground scan cross-section, 3 hollow rings connected by narrow tunnels. The outer ring labeled Layer 1, sediment. The second, Layer 2, charred organic residue. The third, unlabeled. Researchers later noted that the final layer contained carbon traces inconsistent with human remains. Yet within that ring, 3 small circular indentations were found, about the size of a child's hands. Whatever exists beneath that ridge, it's no longer dormant. The heat has returned twice since 2005. Each time after a drought, each time stronger. And when local sensors pick up the hum, it always begins the same way. 3 knocks, then quiet. By 2002, the Crowder site had grown over. Trees, shrubs, and moss had reclaimed the ridge. Official access remained prohibited, but a privately funded research team managed to secure permits under the guise of geological survey. Their mission: examine the subterranean structures first recorded in the 1990s, confirm their alignment, and gather samples. They approached the site at dawn. Claire's recorder captures faint knocking, irregular, soft. The geologists claim it's soil settling. The audio engineer slows the recording. Then the pattern emerges. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. Not soil, not wind. Something repeating. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team identifies a small fissure in the hillside. The opening is barely visible, almost concealed by roots and moss. Townsend leans in, whispering into her recorder. The team uses harnesses to descend. The air is warmer than expected. The floor is covered with ash-like residue. Small impressions, the size of children's hands, are pressed into the surface. Claire photographs them. The shadows cast by the headlamps reveal 3 small circular patterns embedded into the floor. As they move deeper, their equipment begins recording low-frequency vibrations, not seismic, not mechanical. A humming, almost melodic, rising and falling in a rhythm too regular to be natural. The engineer compares the frequency to the Delaney tapes. Match. Beyond a narrow tunnel, the team discovers a small chamber. On the walls, more handprint impressions. Ash residue along the floor. A single wooden spoon, warped and burned, engraved with the letter E, just as described in 1931. Claire kneels, brushing ash from the floor. She uncovers fragments of what appear to be clothing, small, delicate fibers consistent with children's garments from the early 20th century. Suddenly, a faint voice echoes from deeper within the cavern. "They are here. Stay." The team freezes. Lights flicker. The air grows warmer. The geologist insists it's an acoustic phenomenon, yet the voice repeats the same phrase, despite every direction the team turns. After an hour, the team exits. Outside, Claire records her observations. Nothing can explain this. Not folklore, not geology. The site is preserving memory itself, or feeding on it. That night, the recorded audio captures faint knocking in the woods near their campsite. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. The Crowder site, once thought abandoned, was not empty. It preserved traces of Eliza Crowder's life, of her children, of the events of 1931. And whatever force had been there, geological, acoustic, or something else entirely, was still active. By 2005, the Crowder Ridge had become a focal point for acoustic anomaly research. Scientists and historians hope to understand the Crowder echo, the strange residual sounds captured repeatedly over decades. Among the research team was Dr. Elena Morell, an acoustic engineer specializing in low-frequency human voice reconstruction. She had one objective: attempt to isolate any sounds resembling children's voices from the cavern's hum. Morell's team set up an array of hypersensitive microphones inside the preserved tunnels of the Crowder site, each mic positioned carefully to record vertical, horizontal, and ambient frequencies, a 3D sound map of the cavern. The first night, the recordings were silent, save for the hum, low and constant. Then, after midnight, a pattern emerged. A series of 3 soft taps. Pause. 3 taps. Not random, not mechanical. Morell adjusted the playback speed. The taps became discernible as faint syllables, infantile in tone. Ma, el. The team froze. They had not introduced any human voice into the system. Over the next week, the team reconstructed dozens of isolated sounds, whispered phrases repeated in patterns, consistent with Eliza Crowder's journals. Examples: warm now, do not leave, they are here. Some fragments, distorted but legible, carried names, children's names not recorded in any birth registry. Ruth, Ruby, Jesse, Morell noted. These are not echoes of recordings. These are residual imprints, the memory of sound trapped in the cavern itself. The researchers noticed a repeating pattern in the recordings: 3 sets of taps, followed by a lull, then faint singing. The rhythm matched local folklore reports from 1931. Children's footsteps, soft knocking, and a lullaby heard by neighbors. Morell concluded, the cave is repeating the last known interactions of the Crowder family, perhaps compressed, preserved by the cavern's unique geology. But something else became clear. When the recordings were slowed and amplified, the voices sometimes overlapped with the hum in a way that made it sound aware, as if the cavern itself were responding to the presence of the team. On the 3rd night, a team member heard a voice outside the expected playback. A child's whisper, clear and distinct. Don't go. Don't take them. The microphones did not register it. Only human ears could hear. Panic swept through the team. Their instruments showed nothing out of the ordinary. Yet multiple members swore they heard small feet moving across the cavern floor. No cameras or microphones detected movement. When Morell cross-referenced the recovered phrases with Eliza Crowder's journals, she found an eerie correlation. Lines like, the dark waits, I feed them. They're warm now. I hear them beneath the floorboards calling back to me, were mirrored precisely in the reconstructed child voices. The cavern had become a vessel, a time capsule preserving not only sounds but moments of desperation and fear. The final discovery came in the last hours of the expedition. A recording captured a faint, melodic hum, low, uneven, almost maternal. Analysis revealed it matched the frequency of a lullaby recorded from the 1930s Appalachian region, but distorted, layered with unseen harmonics. Claire Townsend, still present as an observer, wrote in her notes, the mother's voice persists here, somewhere between earth and memory. Somewhere the children hear her still. The tape ends abruptly with 3 taps, then silence. The team left the site shaken. No one spoke of returning. The voices of the Crowder children, if they were ever fully present, cannot be heard outside the hollow. Only in the preserved tunnels, in the echoes of ash and stone, does their memory persist? Visual. Dimly lit cavern shot. Shadows cast by headlamps linger unnaturally along the walls. The camera pans to the ash-strewn floor with small impressions of hands. The echoes remain, waiting, listening. By March of 1931, the Crowder cabin had become a place of near total isolation. The children, Ruth, Ruby, and Jesse, no longer attended school, no longer played in the yard. Their presence was recorded only in Eliza's journals, which describe a quiet, chilling routine: waking, eating, sleeping, and moments where she fed them to the dark. The entries are fragmented, water damaged, sometimes nearly illegible. But the message is clear. They wait at the edge of the room, shadows stretching toward them. I call and feed them little by little. Hunger is not for me, but for them. I give them warmth and watch them vanish. The ambiguity of vanish would haunt local legend for decades. Artifacts recovered decades later. A warped wooden spoon, ash embedded in floorboards, handprints pressed into the dirt, suggest that Eliza followed a deliberate ritual. The spoon, engraved with an E, was found exactly where she described leaving it in her journal, near the hearth, under a pile of burned cloth. The ash itself was analyzed. Traces of burned plant matter, hair, and minerals consistent with deep soil from beneath the cabin. It suggests that whatever she fed them to was rooted in the ground below. The children never left the cabin, at least not in the way we understand leaving. Only a few neighbors recall seeing the children in February and March of 1931. One testimony, taken in 1959 from Harold Klein, describes the children standing by the stream. What happened to the children? Theories range from psychological projection to something far more literal, that Eliza fed them into a shadow, a presence beneath the cabin described repeatedly in her writings and later recordings. The Delaney and Morell tapes capture faint imitations of children's voices. Could this be residual memory or something more? By the end of March, the cabin was silent. Eliza's last notes: "They are warm now. I've fed them. I'm alone.